Hi, I'm Amanda Haymaker from Purdue University, the Director of Pre-Award.
Hi, welcome to the Subaward Subcommittee meeting. My name is Amanda Humphrey. I'm the Director of Research Integrity and Export Controls at Northeastern University.
Hi, I'm Kevin Ritchie. I work in the Office of Research Administration. It says Harvard University, but at Harvard Medical School, which will now be an independent FDP member going forward.
And I am Stephanie Scott. I'm the Director of Policy and Research Development at Columbia University.
Next slide, please. So this is just an overview of today's agenda, a quick update on session format, committee update. We're going to go through some of the results from the Subaward delays survey that went out last year. We're also going to talk about research security, also known as foreign influence, and just a couple of quick updates on where we are in our review of the compliance supplement and uniform guidance updates. We're also going to do some look at some project updates, including the contract FAQs and subaward templates, and I believe I also have a DTUA thing to throw in there as well. So, next slide, please. So we're going to have some polling questions. As was previously mentioned, please feel free to ask questions. And if there are any unanswered questions at the end of the session, we will follow up via email. Depending on how long things run today, we may also have an opportunity to unmute people and let people speak, but we're really just going to have to judge it based on how the session is flowing and timing. But we'll do our best to make sure everyone gets heard and has a chance to weigh in on various things. Next slide, please. So I will let Stephanie talk. And we'll just be here.
Okay.
I can't open it.
Oh, no.
Happy hour. I'm teasing.
Okay. First of all, like every busy administrator right now, a research administrator right now, I'm kind of flying off the seat of my pants. I would have had a nice speech prepared, but I don't. So now I'm completely flying off the cuff here. Today is my last official meeting as co-chair of the FDP Subaward Subcommittee. I have been in this role for the last 4 years. And my reason for stepping down is I have taken on, actually for almost a year now, I have been wearing another hat. I'm now the co-chair of the FDP Communications Committee. And it just seemed like this was the right time to step down as we are entering into phase 7. I'm very excited and thrilled that Kevin Ritchie is, has been with us now and working together, and I'm really excited to hear his presence today, taking my spot. I just wanted to take a moment to first thank all of you for allowing me to be in this role. It has absolutely been the highlight of my career. Never in a million years, over 4 years ago when I was asked to do this, did I think I would be able to do it? And it's because of the tremendous amount of support from the volunteers and the knowledge that you have all shared. And the cornerstone of FDP is volunteerism. And especially for those new members right now that maybe this is your first FDP meeting, I strongly, strongly encourage you to participate in any one of the number of working groups in this incredible committee, the Subawards Committee. I want to give an extra special thank you to Amanda and Amanda. You have both been so incredible to work with. I have learned so much from the two of you. We're going to be friends forever. I feel so comfortable just calling either one of you up with questions and just to shoot the breeze. And there are so many people that I've worked so closely with that I just can't get enough. And see, this is what happens when you don't prepare a speech. I'm tearing up, and I am going to see you all, like I always say at the Subawards Committee, I will see you at the bar, this time in the virtual bar at the happy hour. because I am going to be hosting one of the happy hours right after this. And so you could join me if you're lucky enough to get into my group. You'll see how that works, where we can all talk and shoot the breeze and do a meet and greet. But really, everything I know today about subawards is because of all of you. And again, I encourage you to participate because you are going to build this incredible network of people to go to anytime that you have a question. And so thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you so much, Amanda, for having me be part of this. And that's really it. And so also for the first time ever, I'm going to be eerily quiet today. I'm just going to pop in every once in a while with commentary. So there you go. I don't know if I said everything I needed to say, but I guess that's it. Thank you, everybody. And thank you for all the notes.
Okay, so before we move on, Steph, I just wanted to say that when I started getting involved in FDP just a few years ago, you were one of the first people that stood out to me, and the way that you helped run and organize such targeted and useful subaward subcommittee sessions is what really got me interested in FDP and interested in this subcommittee's work. To the point that I even joined as co-chair. That's how interested I was and how valuable I found the work that you did on the committee. So I just wanted to thank you for your hard work on the subcommittee in the past, and then in particular for helping mentor me in this new role over the last couple of months. I've learned a lot in a couple of months, and so I hope I can just keep the momentum going while working with Amanda going forward. So thanks.
That's so sweet of you. Just reminded me of one thing before I go, which is one of my, my baby of this group was the guidance document group and the 80 plus something FAQs that we developed together. And I just wanted to say, Kathy Harlan and Julie Renkis, have taken over leading that group, and I'm so proud of them, and they're incredible. And thank you for continuing on with my baby. And I'm so glad to have worked with you over the last couple of months, Kevin, because I know you're going to be great in this role.
All right, back to work, everyone. Okay, let's focus. So before we move on to the subaward delays results and kind of revisiting where the subaward delays working group is, we do have 2 poll questions for the group here. We have about 260 participants. You might be asking, why are you polling us when you're talking about survey results that you already have? Well, there's some things that we didn't get to, and these are more to get a subjective sense of people's perceptions before we present the actual results of the survey. So we'll pull these poll questions up and then just answer to the best of your knowledge. And if you're not deeply involved in the subaward process at your institution, you can refrain from answering. So could we go to the next slide, please? And I want to kind of just preface these 2 poll questions. So take a look at this first, and then the actual poll will pop up. We want to know, put on your subrecipient hat, and what do you consider to be a reasonable timeline to receive a draft subaward from your pass-through entity? We're trying to define what a delay is here. At what point do things become painful for you and cause problems administratively? And we're going to take this people's general sense. We do have hard data on how long it actually takes, but we're going to take people's general perception here into account as the working group moves forward. Okay, we got about 40% responding here. We'll give it a little bit of time. Even a 15-day increment is a meaningful difference here when we're talking about what constitutes a delay, because when you feel like things are delayed, that's when the churning process of starting follow-up emails back and forth begins. And but this will be helpful. So we're at about 2/3 of the way through here. Just a couple more seconds for more people to respond if they want to.
Kevin, there's a question in the chat that says, is this year 1 or a continuing award?
Both, and we'll get to that. The results of the survey show that there's not a whole lot of difference between the amount of time it takes for a new award or for a continuation year when it comes to subs. don't worry about it. If you're one of 250 respondents here on a rather subjective question, don't overthink it. Just what is your general perception? Okay, we're at about 70%, which I think is fine. We can end polling here and move on to the next question. Okay, so it looks like 45 days. So we'll take that into account as we go forward. Okay, could we move to the next slide, please? And then, so now put on your pass-through entity hat. And what I want to know is, what do you think takes longer, the first half of the subaward process or the second half of the subaward process? The first half is from when you receive the prime award until you review and draft a subaward and send it to the subrecipient. So from receipt of prime award to you send it out the door. And the second half of the process is from when you send it out the door until it gets fully executed. What is your sense of what part of the process takes longer? And this is showing up as sort of 2/3 are saying A and 1/3 B, which kind of makes sense. There's a lot more work to do, setting up prime awards, collecting documents from the PIs, drafting subawards and sending them out the door, than there is just reviewing a subaward that you already expect and signing it. So, okay, this is great. We're approaching 70% of respondents as well. So we can close this poll and move on to the rest of the presentation. Okay, again, that's just about 2/3 say the front end of the process takes more time, and 1/3 say that the back end of the process takes more time. Okay, I just want to revisit the timeline here to refresh everyone, because we weren't able to present as a working group, a subaward delays working group in May. Remember how chaotic that May meeting was. But a year ago, we released the survey, and here we are to talk about some detailed results. And then throughout the fall, the subaward delays working group is going to reconvene. And our goal is to have final recommendations to present to the group in January 2021. Next slide, please. And also, because the survey was released a year ago, I wanted to provide the group with a refresher as to the types of questions we asked. We asked institutions various quantitative and qualitative questions about the subaward process. So we asked for hard numbers, but then we also asked for comments as well, and we did receive a lot of comments. And we ended up with 133 responses, which is good. And if you want to speak in statistical terms, you know, we probably have a representative sample here. So the data that we have is good, and it likely indicates what the subaward environment really is across all of our institutions. But on that note, I just wanted to say that what the working group is doing with these survey results, we're not trying to get published in an academic journal or do some intense statistical analysis here. We just want to do our best to make sense of the responses that we did receive and use the information that we have to inform and support recommendations that can help the subawards community and the broader FDP community as well. And so we're going to go through some results now. If you have any questions or reactions, feel free to use the chat box. We'll try and get to them if we have time. Or at the very least, reach out to me after the presentation, email me, and I'd be happy to incorporate any additional thoughts that people have into the working group's work this fall. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the most important question we asked. How long does it take? How long does it take for you to get subawards out the door? So I want to just leave this up here for a minute so everyone can kind of take a look at what we're looking at here. Now, we asked this question, I made this slide a little bit more concise, but we asked, how long does it take from when your institution receives the prime award or prime award continuation to when you get a subaward out the door? Now, we want to be very careful about not reading our own bias or premonitions into, our preconceptions into the survey results, but I want everyone to think back to Kathy Creedler's presentation that started this whole line of inquiry into subaward delays. And Kathy graciously provided a lot of detailed data from her institution, which suggested that the average timeline was more like 90 days to send a subaward, and even as a subrecipient, Kathy and her institution were waiting on average 90 days to receive subawards. So when we look at this data, this looks like it looks like on the lower end of what of how long it might take. So we're not sure if some respondents were measuring from the prime award start date or possibly from when the subaward fell on their plate, which is maybe already a few days or weeks into the process. But we believe that everyone responded in good faith and to the best of their ability, but we do need to triangulate this response with some other responses that also involve timelines. And I did want to point out that amendments take roughly the same amount of time. They do go a little bit quicker, but somewhat counterintuitively, amendments don't go that much faster than we might think. But regardless, even if 74% of pass-through entities get draft subawards out the door within 60 days, as this indicates, my sense is that we're not quite where we could be, given the fact that we have FDP templates, FAQs, guidance, and a community like this to have discussions on expediting subawards. So even if this is true, I think there's still some room for improvement as well. Next slide, please. So this is the second most important question we asked. What do you believe is the most common reason that delays issuance of subawards at your institution? Okay, this is maybe the strongest signal that we received from the whole survey, is that subaward administrators believe that waiting for PI/department to provide documents is the #1 contributor to issuing delays in issuing subawards. This was a very strong response. This was a very clear-cut winner, #1. Now, institutions also, there's about 60% of institutions rely on the PI to initiate the subaward process, whether it's a new subaward or an amendment to an existing subaward. So let's take a step back and think, how would a PI respond to this information? How would a department grants manager respond to this information that essentially research administrators are sitting around waiting for the PI and their staffs to get them documents to get the process moving? And how does this square with other data that we have available at FDP, perhaps the faculty workload survey? And to what extent, you know, if you look at the faculty workload survey, which cites the fact that 44.3% of a PI's time is spent on administrative responsibilities away from research, what component of that 44.3% is messing with subawards and chasing down documents from subrecipients or organizing documents in support of subawards? So something to look at, something for the working group to look at. Next slide, please. The previous question was about issuing subawards. This question is about what delays execution of subawards. Unfortunately, the results here are a little bit less clear. We're not seeing as strong of a signal as we are. The survey sort of focused more on the process of issuing subawards than on executing subawards. But I think the takeaway here is that even if waiting for internal approvals at the pass-through entity is cited as the #1 most common reason to delay execution, there's no evidence to support like a claim that, that this contributes a lot of time to the delay. So board and executive approval might be the most common thing that we're waiting for as pass-through entities, but it usually comes very quickly as opposed to quote unquote waiting for documents from the PI and department. Next slide, please. Okay, I wanted to share just a handful of other results. There's a lot of good information that the working group is going to be going through and unpacking and looking at in greater detail. But I think the group here at this subcommittee session might find a few other things interesting. So I wanted to point out that, you know, look at the take-up rate for amendments. 98% of institutions issue amendments instead of new agreements for continuation years. And we've heard various reasons why the 2% might issue new new subawards instead of amendments. But we're almost to the point where everyone issues amendments. But remember, they don't go much faster than new subawards anyway. So where is there room to improve? And I want to say that later in this presentation, you'll get a chance to hear about updates to the subaward templates or to the subaward amendment templates. So maybe that'll help expedite things, or maybe in the future, we can make recommendations as a working group for further revisions to amendment templates going forward. Second thing, 93% of institutions pass automatic carry forward down to subrecipients. So I know that this has been a topic of conversation in the past within this group and at FDP, but the Subaward Delays Working Group is going to look at this question from a delays perspective. So does adding this restriction when it's not in the prime award contribute meaningfully to subaward delays? And even if it does, the fact that only 7% of institutions add the restriction, is there a whole lot of room to improve in this area? Something we'll have to consider. The third bullet point, unilateral amendments do not seem to be as popular as one might think. The idea of a unilateral amendment was surely to expedite things. You don't require the other party's signature. You send it and forget it. You send it and process it. But with only 1/3 of pass-through entities issuing unilateral amendments when they have the option to, that says something. So maybe, can we adjust our guidance? Can we adjust those unilateral templates? Can we adjust the process or the conversation around unilateral templates to make things go quicker? And there still is the usual disagreement over the definition of a non-substantive change. So there are a lot of comments that the working group has to go through. Even though we have published in the guidance specifics on what constitutes a non-substantive change, a lot of people don't agree. So we'll take that into account. And as far as good news goes, it doesn't seem, the preliminary analysis, it doesn't seem like we have an excessive documentation problem here. Pass-through entities seem to be taking great care in limiting document collection to whatever is required by the prime sponsor at any stage. So that's proposal, just in time, and award and subaward stage. So that's a good sign. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of people asking for a whole lot of excessive documents, and that rolls into the last bullet point where subrecipient questionnaires also don't seem to be too popular. They rank pretty low as far as priority documents during any sort of document collection at any phase, and this is especially true if the subrecipient is in the FDP expanded clearinghouse. Next slide, please. Okay, next steps. The next steps are to wrap this project up. We released the survey a year ago, and we're eager to get together this fall and write up the recommendations that can hopefully benefit everyone in the subawards community. I want to thank everyone that responded on behalf of their institution, especially those that were willing to share their business processes, and especially those that were willing to enter very thoughtful comments and suggestions in the open-ended text-based responses to the questions that we asked. There's a lot of really good information that we, as the Subaward Delays Working Group, are eager to read through. And we want to mine those suggestions for trends that we can bring back to the group and say, hey, here's some promising practices that we discovered thanks to the survey and thanks to the anonymized input that we received. Because the survey is a year old, we also need to account for some changes that have happened in the interim. So there was a question about data use terms, whether you use a separate agreement or incorporate them into a subaward. We now have attachment 7, so we're going to have to account for some of these changes that have happened over the last year. And the last thing I wanted to say is that as we develop recommendations, one, we'll also probably share somehow, share a summary report of the survey itself. In the interest of transparency, there's no real secrets. I think we'd be happy to format the survey results in a way that everyone can read them. But we want to maybe tailor our recommendations at a few different levels here. So that maybe there's some recommendations we can make that help inform other work streams at FDP. And I'm really thinking about that. It takes the PI, waiting for documents from the PI and department as the biggest contributor to subaward delays. maybe we can talk with faculty workload survey, or maybe have a broader discussion at FDP about that particular component. There's also recommendations that the group can likely make for the subaward subcommittee, how we could revise templates or the guidance going forward. There's also recommendations we can make to individual institutions. And even if we're not making a recommendation, by providing some of the quantitative results, we can at least let you know where your institution stands within the broader context of the subaward community. And finally, those of you that actually do the work, those of you that actually draft and send and sign the subawards, maybe there's something that you could adjust in your own individual process or approach to subawards. For example, if it's clear that 45 days is the industry standard for how long it takes, maybe we don't need to engage in a whole lot of follow-up, at least within the first 30 days of a period of performance. Kind of take a deep breath and understand that there's a real timeline associated with these awards, and we need to give the pass-through entity some room to breathe, whether it's a new award or a continuation. Okay, I just want to quote, for those of you that listened to the session yesterday, Dick Seligman, who said yesterday and probably many times before, not all administrative burden originates in Washington, D.C. So as we look at the subaward delays survey results, let's look at it and let's look at the results and the recommendations and look internally and assess our own processes objectively and see how we can all as individuals and as institutions contribute to a more expedited subaward process. And that is it for me. Thanks.
Are there any questions that anyone has about that? If you guys do come up with questions as we go through the rest of the presentation, please feel free to just type them in the chat box. There's another opportunity to kind of come back to this topic as we move forward in the presentation. So next up is research security. So we are not going to go over the whole series of events around research security or foreign influence. For those of you that have not participated in any of the conversations and presentations to date, please look back at the past FDP meeting presentations, looking for foreign influence presentations and summaries, and those should give you the details that you might be looking for on this. From our perspective here today, what we're really hoping to do is have a conversation about where the nexus point of risk management versus federal requirements on subawards is. We're very lucky to be joined by Pamela Webb and Jim Luther, who have been leading the efforts around foreign influence at FDP, and so hopefully they'll join us and chime in. So what I wanted to do is just briefly look at what is going on in a very broad, high level. So we have a lot of robust dialogue going on between research entities, especially about open university environments. We have federal lawmakers weighing in on conversations or having their own dialogues, potentially talking about new legislation. We have federal administrators and federal enforcement agencies also contributing to the dialogue here, and we have a lot of enforcement activity that we have seen and a lot of media coverage. And it's kind of like a synchronized downhill ski team of some sort. I don't know, I've never seen one before, but you just have all these things and they're kind of racing along to what you feel like is one big conclusion that you're just anticipating. So there's a very busy landscape with a lot of activity, a lot of people talking about research security, including journalists and lawmakers that have perhaps not spent a lot of time talking about it in a university context before. So there's think tanks, academic institutional forums every couple of weeks. There's a lot of engagement and discussion. And so I think a lot of us feel that what should we be doing? And I think that is a question that we've gotten a couple of times now through the Subaward subcommittee. And that's what we wanted to bring here for you guys today. So you can see we've got a lot of synchronous activity, but if you look at the next slide, please, what we don't have is a lot, next slide, yeah, there we go. What we don't have is a lot of final changes. So we think that all of these things are speeding toward a particular direction, that downhill ski team. you think they're all going the same place, but we're not really sure. We're not there yet. We don't have any new laws. We don't have any new administrative requirements or even a definition of talent program. I'm grateful because that means that there's a lot of thoughtful, deliberate engagement by our agency partners within the government, and they're talking to stakeholders, they're talking to us. So in the midst of all of these conversations, it's normal and natural for institutions to think about how best to protect the interests of their institution and their faculty. We've been approached a few times about whether or not foreign influence or research security language will be added either to a letter of intent and or the subaward. So today what we're hoping to do is engage in a conversation with everyone. But first, what we also wanted to do was just briefly pause and look at where we are with respect to two of our larger federal funding agencies. So next slide, please. As many of us have seen, in particular through the NIH and NSF updates yesterday, they have made changes and clarifications to existing policies, forms, and procedures as direct results of their concerns around research security. They continue, though, to encourage and celebrate global research activities. They've made it very clear they don't want people to not go out there and have international appointments and have international collaborations. The focus is on transparency. We are still waiting for other agencies to put forward what their revised processes will be. They're reviewing them. They've made a lot of indications that they will be updating their policies and procedures, so we're still waiting there. But I also just want to really clarify that this is all about ensuring disclosures are clear, consistent, transparent, timely, and updated routinely. And that was all consistent with what NSF and NIH announced and talked about yesterday, in particular with the expectations around updating your current and pending within 30 days of a change and or at the time of your next progress report. So DOE does have a prohibition on some foreign talent program participation. I believe that that relates specifically to access to their facilities. And then some special prohibitions related to contracting with DOE. But those restrictions are typically special terms articulated in a notice of award and would be flowed down in attachment 2 of a subaward. With respect to NIH, NSF expectations at the moment, those are routine expectations that they would expect you to be following, whether you are a pass-through entity or a subrecipient, and the norm would be to do that in both cases. Next slide, please. Recently, we learned that some institutions have begun asking about foreign influence or research security in various ways. Specifically, there is one institution that has added a phrase to their letter of intent that says all of the named personnel on the subaward have disclosed in the relevant proposal documents, biosketch, current and pending, etc., any international appointments or affiliations, paid or unpaid, or financial or in-kind support received from a foreign entity in the past 12 months. So where we really want to open the dialogue today is, if you were asked to sign off on this statement of intent, would you? And then broaden the discussion around what are people thinking about in this space, both with respect to the subaward itself and also with respect to the letter of intent process. So with that, I especially would like if Pamela or Jim has anything they want to chime in and add, you guys are more than welcome to please.
Well, I guess I would want to answer this, Amanda, by saying, no, I would not be comfortable with signing off on this. But the reason isn't so much the text that's in here, as it is that I think it's inconsistent with our mission as FDP and our commitment to each other to minimize administrative burden. So the requirements that I have as a recipient of federal funds are to meet the agency's requirements. And so when I sign off on that subaward, whether it's a proposal or the subaward itself, I'm committing that I've done everything that I need to do. What I don't want to do is get into discussions about do my proposal and award process exactly mirror or match up to yours, as the pass-through entities say. And I don't mean you personally, of course, Amanda. I just mean whoever that pass-through entity is. And I think we've said really clearly as part of the subaward group that part of what we're doing here is we're taking some risk, right? We're not taking undue risk, but we're taking reasonable risk in the interest of reducing administrative burden. And so to me, when I sign that subaward saying I'm compliant, I have that obligation. The only other thing I think I would add there is, it potentially could get kind of, it would be unclear who would be responsible for a failure if you had additional language in the subaward and the pass-through entity's language might be a little different than what your process is. Well, is that then the pass-through entity's responsibility to reach out and do that oversight and that monitoring and et cetera? I don't think it is. I think it's it's going back to our responsibilities as an individual partner on this to have compliant systems. And so I prefer to keep it consistent with any other requirement that we're obligated to be compliant with.
Yeah, this is Jim. I don't have a lot to add to that, Amanda, other than, I'm trying, as FTP institutions, this is exactly what we're trying not to do, right? And it's not consistent with, the pending changes from uniform guidance that try to give a safe harbor to some of it as we work with each other. So I think to me, and Pamela's point about this language could differ a little bit from other language, and it doesn't. I bear the burden of this, not having this attestation or this language doesn't in any way change that. I think if there's some context around risk that is related to this that I don't see, then maybe over and above. But other than that, I don't understand the value of adding this language.
Yeah, and I think to build on what you were just pointing out is this doesn't necessarily say certification. It doesn't say representation, but it also doesn't say to the best of my knowledge and belief, right? And we've seen cases recently where people have intentionally hidden a particular tie. And so what if you miss that? What if you took people at their word in some fashion, and now you've signed this document that doesn't have language that is consistent with the NSF requirement or the NIH requirement, which is always you've done the best that you can to your knowledge and belief. You've done what you've done in compliance with your policy, and you've checked it to the best extent that you're able to as an institution. It's a different framework. I'm also concerned about our faculty that, in the past couple of months, yes, there's been so much activity in research security, and there have been so many actions taken that is perhaps getting the attention of our faculty, but at the same time, they've also been dealing with a lot of personal matters, the pandemic, dealing with family, their research labs shutting down, supervising children's schools, not to mention all of the other tensions happening across the country. And so it can be a very difficult environment for them to pay attention to what we're saying about going in and making sure their disclosures are up to date, and have you given us all of the information? Is it all current? And do you understand what we're now asking you for, and that it's different? A lot of them are probably just starting to grapple now with what the NSF has implemented in terms of their terms and conditions for the 10-5 deadlines.
I know when I spoke to one institution that wanted to do something similar, I said, well, is your goal with this? And they said, well, I want to put the onus on the subrecipient. I want them responsible for checking this. And I think you kind of hit something, Pamela and Jim. I think just by asking the question, the pass-through entity is adding additional risk onto itself. You think that you're removing the responsibility and putting the onus on the subrecipient, but then what happens when you potentially get audited and an auditor says, well, what are you doing with this extra information that you're collecting? And you could say that about this question or even other questions that you feel like you're putting that extra protection on, but really it could backfire potentially.
You know, it reminds me of, Stephanie, it reminds me of in the earlier days of the Subaward template where people wanted us to actually sign attestation statements relative to conflict of interest compliance and, or, you know, send us proof that you collected at time of proposal, you know, conflict of interest disclosures, that type of thing. And part of what we pushed back with that predecessor, right, to the expanded clearinghouse was the original FCOI clearinghouse to say, no, if we have a compliant policy, that's all you need, right? You have affirmed that your policy is in compliance with the agency's regulations. And so it just goes back to reinforce what you just said. I think one other point that we may, at some point, we're still grappling with what should an institution be responsible for and what should an individual investigator be responsible for in terms of completeness and accuracy of what they submit, right? I can't know if they don't tell me, right? It is my job to make sure that I've asked the right questions. So I think we're still also grappling a little bit with this, and I wonder if having a statement like this in a subaward could further muddy that water, if you will, in terms of as we figure out what's the investigator's obligations and what's ours.
That's a great point. Next slide, please. And we do have a couple of other discussion questions. So I think we've talked a little bit about the first one there, and what we'd like to hear from the community is, what are your major concerns around foreign influence in the subaward setting? What are you hoping to avoid? You know, how has research security at your institution shifted how collaborations are executed? And where are the most effective controls? How are they on the front end of the proposal stage? Are they part of award monitoring? Is it just relying on the other institution in accordance with what's stated in the RTCs and the terms and conditions of the agency at the time of proposal?
Guess could folks raise their hand? I guess, do they have that functionality to raise their hand?
Yeah, can you guys raise your hands? I don't see a raise hand. I see a yes, no, go slower, go faster, and then there's a chat box.
So you're a co-host, so you won't see the raise hand, but our attendees can go into the participants list and there should be a little blue raise hand. It looks like we have someone already.
I see one.
Mute.
Okay. I will ask to unmute. Is it working? I don't know. Oh, it went away.
So if you raise your hand, there we go. We'll ask to unmute you. Okay, we got one.
Okay. I clicked ask to unmute.
There you go.
Hi, this is Mary Lee. I kept my video off so I'd have better bandwidth. I have a question, whether any of our peer institutions have guidelines for managing subrecipients' conflicts of interest or conflicts of commitment reporting. Because at the pass-through entity level, for our own reporting, conflicts of commitment seem to be required to be reported through the sponsored research offices And then the FCOIs are reported through the Conflicts of Interest program through ERA Commons' FCOI module in the case of NIH. And unrelated to foreign influence, I've had discussions with pass-through entity institutions both ways as a subrecipient and also being the pass-through entity of reporting FCOI for my PI. Just wondering if any of our peer institutions have had to do that in the context of foreign influence, and maybe Pamela and Jim have heard some use cases. Thank you.
That's a great question.
It's not really popping immediately into my head, to be honest with you, Mary. But I will say where I do worry about this with another, like with a proposed subrecipient, is in the circumstances where I would describe it as somewhat tongue-in-cheek as Joe's bait and research, right? That maybe I don't worry about with other FTP institutions, because I think we're all pretty darn sophisticated and paying attention and listening to all of this, trying at least to get it right. But I do think we might have some potential subaward partners out there that don't have the benefit of all of this and might not be as aware of their obligations. And so I can see the possibility of, if I had any reason to wonder, for example, like if that institution showed up in the press, I might, if I could catch it at the time, go out and have a specific conversation with them just to find out how comfortable they felt with their own techniques to manage this.
That makes sense. Oh, Jessica, let me unmute you.
Thank you. So I'm looking at the questions on the screen, and I see that are the most effective controls on the front end or on the back end. And I actually think the front end and the back end controls, both the statement of intent at time of submission and the subawarding process, have relatively good controls as far as you can have good controls in this area, because it always makes me nervous with, are we getting the full truth in all cases. My personal feeling is where there isn't much in the way of controls, and what always scares me is the just-in-time process, because other support is coming from subawardee institutions, and I generally don't have any idea whether or not that other support has actually been reviewed by the sponsored programs office at the other institution. And I know, sometimes investigators send us other support to review for just-in-time for whatever subaward they're on, and then other times other support must have gone out. I never looked at it, and suddenly we have a subaward. So I don't know. And so that's what really scares me now, with the requirement to disclose all appointments everywhere, and this really high degree of oversight regarding it.
All I can say is I agree, right? I think that's a great point. I was interested in Jean's response. If people heard Jean yesterday, somebody asked when somebody submits their current and pending, when a faculty member submits their current and pending, and the university doesn't have a role in reviewing, who is the accountable party? And I think she was pretty clear, it's the faculty member, right? And that was the clearest that I've heard. I don't know what NIH would say about that, but even with that answer, I think it's a good question, because as institutions, we want to support our faculty in making sure that they can be as compliant, accurate, and transparent as possible. I think it's a good question.
And we received a question in the chat that reads, my question would be, do any of us yet feel like we are exactly where we need to be with research security vetting informed by and integrated across all parts of our university, such that we are in a position to judge whether a subrecipient's own response to research security could be a risk to us. So I think that's a great question to pose here, is if you get that information, what are you going to do with it? And are you ready to do something at somebody else's institution while you're still kind of hashing things out potentially at your own institution?
It'd be a great polling question, Amanda, but I'm pretty sure that I would know what the response would look like. So
Yeah, and I don't know if everyone would want to have the results live on.
yeah.
Have those on the record, if you will.
I mean, I'll just add, I remember this conversation that I had with the other institution. So at the FDP, we're trying to encourage, or I think it's a must, right? We say that your letter of intent can only be project-specific questions and not entity-specific questions.
Right.
And so we're also sort of moving away from that with this. And I think when I spoke to the other institution, they were making the argument, but it is a project specific question if we ask this. But I guess, where was I going with this? See, I'm all mixed up today. I guess where I was going with this is, I don't know if as the FDP, we can say, like, you're not allowed to add this to your letter of intent. You are allowed to add this. I mean, we do try to do that with the clearinghouse. But I think I would take away all of these questions in this conversation that we're having and just rethink, do we want to ask these questions of one another? And is that AOR signature on the letter of intent enough to be the catch-all, like as Pamela was saying at the beginning of this conversation?
And I think that, the conversation yesterday with Jean, as Jim pointed out, is she's saying you're certifying to the best of your knowledge and belief, right, when you sign off on that box. And whether you're a pass-through entity or a subrecipient, I think the point still stands is you can't reach into somebody's head and get the information if they haven't put it on the paper in front of you and disclosed it in a transparent manner. So it is an interesting point at which we say, when are we going above and beyond what is needed, and when is it, somebody is going to hide their relationship? Does it matter whether it's your investigator or the subrecipient investigator? Doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Amanda. I wanted to follow up on Andrea's question, the one that you read just a minute ago, because that's where, although Jean was very clear that it's the PI's responsibility when they sign their current and pending, it's our responsibility, as Andrea mentioned, to make sure that we're informed by and integrated across all parts of the university, and that we as administrators are supporting that process, right? And that's the holy grail, right? Connecting conflict of interest and other support and current and pending and outside activities and consulting and all those bits and pieces, along with training and monitoring and everything else we should be doing to make sure that we have all the internal controls. And I think we're all repeating the same thing. I think just throwing a statement in there as an attestation does not absolve us of our fiduciary responsibilities for everything else where we truly could be adding some critical value. Just adding that attestation to me creates a number of issues that we've just outlined and does not put the institution in a better position from a risk standpoint.
I think that's a really great point to move to the next slide on, because as we talked about this behind the scenes in preparation for this, we also wanted to come up with some ideas of how people could perhaps get a little bit more comfortable if they're thinking about what are the risks of collaboration. If you have somebody who's perhaps in the expanded clearinghouse or even in the FCY clearinghouse, you at least have some assurance that a check is going on at that institution on an ongoing basis. There's some expectation around that with disclosure. And then, kind of like we have desk audits available, if you want to ask more questions about something, there's always a post-proposal review of submissions, just, spot checking your submissions potentially. I see we have another hand up, so I'm just going to unmute Maura. Go ahead.
Thanks, Amanda. I was just going to add that instead of risk transfer, maybe there could just be a little room for stewardship of this. I think there's a lot of unknowns, so I agree with all that. We're still trying to figure it out. But to the point of the environment of it, it's always this like new hot topic button that may or may not contain high risk. But it's nice to, at least if we could recognize institutions that might not even have some awareness, and that's a possibility. And so it doesn't have to be a citation, it doesn't have to be a certification, but maybe just a stewardship awareness statement. So that's my comment.
It's a good point, is just thinking about what does it mean to be a steward. We did have another comment come into the chat, and it says the following is the certification we had to make at proposal submission time on behalf of our institution and our subcontractors. Is there any current participation in a foreign government talent recruitment program by either your company at a corporate level and or an individual employee sub-tier who is associated with a subcontract purchase order for SRNS? So that's interesting because, as I think we mentioned on one of the earlier slides, JCOR is working on a definition actually of a foreign government talent recruitment program at this juncture in time. There actually is not a kind of codified universal definition of foreign talent program.
I'm wondering if that question's related because she said subcontractors, if she's dealing with a federal contract like the DOE.
Yep,
I'm wondering if the, oh, there we go. Yeah, DOE National Lab.
And that is a slightly different thing because they do have a very specific order in the Department of Energy. If you're accessing a DOE facility or you're a DOE employee, that foreign talent recruitment programs are banned, and that does include any contractors or subcontractors who are affiliated with your organization who might be going into the lab.
I can jump in here and say at Purdue, when we see a question like that we have to certify with a proposal submission or some sort of reps and certs, we are going through, at least internally. I'm not aware of any of these that have had a subrecipient on them yet, although maybe we have, but at least internally we are going back and asking the PI to certify that question for us to make sure that anybody involved that we can actually provide that certification for.
So are there any other comments from the community? And then Mary Lee has clarified for us that the DOE order 486.1 includes a definition of foreign recruitment program as it relates to Department of Energy, and it applies to on-site subcontractors only.
Right.
So we will probably be having this discussion again at some point, or people will weigh in a little bit more probably on the listserv after this, but we just wanted to open the door to this dialogue with everyone. So maybe we can move on to the next topic. Next slide, please. So the compliance supplement, very exciting, that came out. And the big question is COVID-19 expenses, should they be included in the CFA, and does that mean that they should be reported to the pass-through entity? We've decided to kind of wait and see because there's supposed to be a COVID-specific supplement coming September 2020. Next slide, please. Kevin, I think you pulled this one
Yep.
together.
So as far as uniform guidance goes, you probably and hopefully have already heard that the uniform guidance is being revised, and you're probably reviewing and interpreting the revisions at your institutions or via other channels. But some of the revisions may also impact subawards in particular. So various working groups within the subawards subcommittee are looking into the specific impacts in their respective areas. And so you could expect more specific guidance to follow, especially leading up to the federal agency deadline of November 12th to have reviewed and incorporated the changes. So the first bullet point includes, when the slides are made available, a link to OMB's website, or it's a link to performance.gov and the cap goal number 8 or whatever it is. But you can actually rewatch the webinar, and then there's a forward link to the Federal Register, so you can actually read the revisions. Two things to point out that are important and that are not on the slide, and that I should put on the slide before we post them, is the 2 provisions that are in effect as of August 13th that aren't waiting until November 12th. And again, you probably have already heard about this, but those are 200.216, prohibition on certain telecommunication and video surveillance services or equipment. Okay, so that's 200.216 is currently effective. And it prohibits federal award recipients from using government funds to enter into contracts with entities that use covered telecommunications equipment or services. Go read 200.216 if you haven't already. And we heard yesterday at least one federal agency mentioned, I think it was EPA, mentioned that they expect pass-through entities to communicate this requirement to their subrecipients. So we'll have to figure out if anything needs to change in the subaward world to make this more explicit or to meet this requirement. The other clause that is effective now is a change to 200.340, the termination provisions. And the changes to 200.340 strengthen the ability of the federal awarding agency to terminate federal awards when the federal award no longer effectuates program goals or federal agency priorities. And ideally, these will be included in federal awards wherever applicable by November 12th. And if you read, sorry, I'm just scrolling up to my notes here. If you read the preamble that's available to the changes on the Federal Register, you can get the narrative summary of the comments that OMB has received and the changes that they're making. And they can address, those comments do address to varying levels of satisfaction amongst our community. The comments that were submitted, in particular, as it pertains to the strengthening the termination provisions and what a goal for a research grant means as opposed to other grants that are covered under this policy. So, and here's a few other bullet points. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but a few other bullet points of the types of things changing in the revised uniform guidance that might affect the subaward process, to include the subrecipient not having to have a full SAM.gov registration and only having to provide a unique entity identifier. The fact that pass-through entities are responsible for resolving only audit findings associated with their subawards and not for any cross-cutting findings at a subrecipient. Going back to the termination clause that I just mentioned, we could expect to see more in the way of program goals and agency priorities included in federal awards that we receive. Longer reporting and stricter closeout, maybe stricter isn't the right word, but the final language, the revised uniform guidance increases the number of days for recipients to submit closeout reports from 90 to 120 days, but encourages a more timely, if not strict, closeout of projects in general, such that federal agencies would move to closeout awards with whatever documents that they have available. So this might impact the way that pass-through entities collect closeout reports from subrecipients and the associated timelines as well. And then there's actually a change to the definition of period of performance and budget period clarification. You might want to just go in and read those, but now we say things like carry forward of unobligated balances to subsequent budget periods, not to subsequent periods of performance. and again, agency updates by November 12th. And so what I'll do with this slide before we post it, I'll try and include the specific clauses to all these and add the 2 provisions that are in effect right now. Oh, sorry, and then one minor thing, of course, they renumbered a bunch of clauses. So for those of you that had those numbers memorized, not so fast. You're gonna have to go back and relearn them. So we'll have to update templates to make sure that references are accurately, that the templates are accurately referencing the new clauses and the revised clauses. So that's it for uniform guidance.
Next slide, please. So we are just wrapping up the guidance document, and that is forthcoming. I think it will probably be out in the next 2 to 3 weeks. We've also created a matrix that compares the DTUA to attachment 7 and the broader subaward agreement, and explains any differences between the 2 documents. So what we're hoping by creating that tool is that we can provide a little bit more context for how to read across, if you're somebody that's really familiar with a data use agreement and you're not really sure, well, where's all this stuff that's usually in a data use agreement and it's somewhere else in the subaward template. We want to make sure that it's clear that we've explained that and helped you to find that so that it can be communicated to whichever stakeholders in your organization would like to know that in order to be able to think about accepting or using the DTUA template. Next slide, please. So we will be looking at the uniform guidance changes. I believe we actually also have a, oh, can you go back? Sorry. It's speeding forward a little bit. Okay. So we will be making sure that the templates get updated, that they have the correct UG changes in them. We may need to make some additional revisions, in particular as it relates to, as Kevin indicated, section 216. So it says here that we'll be doing our next major release in fall 2021. Depending on the outcome of our conversation, we may put out something that at least addresses the UG changes a little bit sooner than that. We're still discussing whether we want to keep to the schedule or whether we want to update it as soon as possible so that we're in alignment with the current version of uniform guidance as close to November as possible. So if anyone has any specific thoughts on that, please let us know. We have our email address at the end of the deck. Next slide, please. Subaward template updates. So if Laura or Stephanie, if you guys are on and want to speak, let me know. Otherwise, I can run through this. You can just raise your hand and I can unmute you. But this year, instead of updating the actual subaward template itself, we focused on the amendment templates. So they will be posted very soon. We will be including our amendment template crosswalk, our user guides, and looking at the FAQs to make sure that things are in alignment. We did look at both the bilateral and unilateral. Oh, Laura's here, so I will unmute her.
Oh, hi, this is Laura Register. Amanda, you can keep going. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, that's okay. So Laura Register and Stephanie Stone have been leading the template updates, and they're the ones that have really changed the way that we've thought about the modification templates, made them more consistent in format and language, and thought about the period of performance concerns that were raised last year, and also how we're going to add the UEI requirement that will be coming at the end of this current calendar year. So on the next slide, we have just a little overview of what will be posted in the next week or two. Laura, is there anything that you would like to point out here?
I think the main highlight from this, and we'll be doing a webinar to walk through the changes and how everything's implemented, and we're going to be working on a user guide as well for these, is just that everything now aligns between your bilateral, your unilateral, your bilateral fill-in. This is going to be the bilateral with pre-selected options, and as you can see on the left-hand side, that's what it's going to look like when you haven't made any selections, and on the right-hand side, those are going to be where you're selecting the applicable options on the new templates to be able to show what's relevant and what's not, to reduce any clutter and to make it more consistent. As you can see, we also have the UEI as an option included in here for when it is applicable, and if you don't have it on haven't included it on a previous agreement, so that organizations have a way to collect it with as little burden as possible, and also a few clarification items on there. So we will be doing a more in-depth walkthrough on these, but we just wanted to kind of give you a little sneak peek of what it's going to look like moving forward, where we've got a lot more pre-programmed options, but we also have flexibility to work with any institution. And this can also be utilized regardless of whether you're working with FDP members or not, which is kind of what we were hoping for to help you reduce administrative burden across the board, is that you might be able to use a single template for most of your modifications.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And thank you to you and Stephanie for leading a great work group and a lot of great discussion on this area. So thank you. Next slide, please. Subcontract sample guidance will be coming soon for comment on the listserv. It's actually going to be more in the format of a user guide, and we'll be walking users through how to complete the sample. And as we learned about that and talked about that, we thought that that might be a good resource for the subawards as well. So we're talking about how we can create something that is perhaps more of a user guide format that gives you some information about how to fill out specific units of the template or the sample in this case.
Did you see the question about the foreign subawards? Is there a separate amendment for foreign subawards coming, or is there a US dollars box to check on the new templates?
I don't think that we have a separate amendment for foreign subawards coming. We definitely can talk about what I thought that USD was in front of the dollar box on the subaward template, but I will double check and we can see if we can just simply add a USD in front of the amendment.
It says it on the bottom of the mod form.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay. Next slide, please. So just a friendly reminder about changes. Please don't. If you get one with changes, please let us know. We'll contact the institution. Next slide. And COVID-19 and subawards. We just want to remind everyone, we did post some force majeure language samples to the subaward forms page. It is not required to include force majeure language because of additional terms on attachment 2. We believe that the agency terms and conditions typically cover when an entity is not able to perform due to a natural disaster or event. So we do not believe that anyone needs to rush out and modify all of their subawards and add force majeure language if you don't want to do so. But we did try and give some options there just in case. So there's 3 choices in that sample language. One is the FDP foreign subaward sample language. There's a general force majeure language, and then there's also a COVID-19 specific language. Next slide, please. And subawards at the fdp.org automatically goes to all of us except Sue, not you, Stephanie.
No. Okay. Well, I'm not totally going away anywhere. By the way, I'm still working with Amanda Humphrey on that IACUC MOU working group. So I'm still leading, those discussions. And I'm just going to be a participant now, just not a co-chair. And so I'll be excited to see you all at the happy hour who signed up.
Any last comments, anyone? Any last questions?
Last comments, questions, concerns? No.
Okay.
All right. I guess this
Very
is it.
quiet today.
I know. Well, thank you for our special guests, Pamela Webb and Jim Luther, for joining us in the foreign influence discussion. That was great. Thank you for joining us. And I guess this is the after show. This is like when everyone signs off and we're saying goodbye. You can see all the numbers going down.